everybody will have that moments where they'll know their true self and they'll know what they have to do next. And it might involve a huge shift of identity, or it may only involve a small shift of identity.
Yeah.
For me, it was kind of huge.
Yeah.
And, I changed completely who I was. I was completely reinvented me as a mother.
Hello and welcome to the Empowered Woman podcast. This week I'm joined by doula and doula trainer Krysia Lynch. In this episode we talk about how Krysia was reinvented after becoming a mother and what matrescence means to her. We also talk about the supports that mums should have before and after birth. Thank you, Krysia, for joining me on my podcast, The Empowered Woman. We are focused this season on matrescence. So tell me, first of all, what it is that you do and when you first came across the term matrescence.
Right. What do I do? Well, I'm not going to try and take up the whole podcast with what I do. I could, because there are so many different things. I'm going to start off perhaps at the end, which is one of the things that I do is that I train birth doulas and postnatal doulas. So I guess I'll have to say a little bit about what is a postnatal doula and a doula. So it's a funny old name, doula, bula. It's a Greek term, actually. It means she who serves. So it basically means somebody who accompanies people on their birthing journeys or accompanies people on their postnatal journeys. So in that process of becoming a parent, of becoming a mother. And also, because you're supporting the whole family, you are supporting children who may have been little emperors or empresses in their own dominions, that now they're going to have to share that space with somebody else. So you're also empowering and supporting the whole family. In addition to that, I guess I got into that because of my own experiences as becoming a parent and realizing it was quite a profound thing.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow I seemed to know that intuitively, that it wasn't just, that means I go to a different section in Dunnes, and get to buy pink or blue, because that usually is the choice in Dunnes. Little sleep suits.
Yeah.
I kind of knew it was quite a big transformative experience. And I initially, on my first pregnancy, came across something called birthing from within. And I think because it had the within part in it, it resonated with me. And I thought, yeah, that's actually what's happening here. It's not just that I'm bringing forth another human being, which of course is miraculous and incredible in and of itself, but it's that I am birthing a new me as well. I'm birthing something else that's completely new. So that's, I guess, what drew me in. And then I became involved in a lot of advocacy. So I was the chair of AIMS Ireland for a long time, which is about to relaunch itself. I was the chair of the Home Birth Association of Ireland for a long time. I trained as a classical homeopath primarily to be able to support my own kids and the women that I took care of, because homeopathy is such a great support for people in the process of becoming a parent. And I mean physically, emotionally, spiritually, everything.
So tell me then, you felt a profound shift in becoming a mother. So you were
yeah, absolutely.
feeling something. Did you have the words or the language for that shift?
No, I don't think so. And in fact, I think matrescence only sort of was coined for me as a term when I read a book by Naomi Stadler, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably aware of that book. It's called something, I think it's called, she has many, but I think the one that I first read was What Do Mothers Do When They're Doing Absolutely Nothing? And so much of what she said in that book was kind of what I had felt. I suspect, as many of your listeners, I was a doer.
Mm-hmm.
So I had, quite an established career. I was a professor at Trinity College in environmental health towards the end, although environmental things and sustainability and other environmental and geographic things as well. And, I simply planned that I would go back to work. I had managed to negotiate a much sought after place in the Trinity creche. And I just assumed, well, you had this 12 weeks. And God, I was going to be so bored in that 12 weeks, and maybe I could write some research. And I had a few pieces of things, a bit of admin that I needed to fill. And I ran my maternity leave until the very last day, do what lots of people do, I think, connived with my doctor to ensure that he kind of said that I was due slightly different time than what I was due so that I could work right the way through towards the end. And my children, God love them, they all arrived on time. They never gave, or early, in fact, they never gave me that feeling of having to wait. But yeah, so I had this great doing kind of motivator within me, and I was less good, I think, at being. So after I had my first child, and I was very lucky. I had a really lovely birth experience, and I had a home birth midwife, and she kind of set everything in place for me. She sort of said stuff about, oh, well, you won't be buying a buggy because you don't need that, and you won't be buying a cot because you don't need that either. And you won't be, so she was sort of like, you won't be doing all these things, but these are the things you will be doing. You'll be with your baby all the time and you will be breastfeeding. And so she was like, in a way, she was a doula, even though she never called herself that because she was a midwife. And she came and she gave 6 weeks of postnatal care. So she came pretty much every day in that 42 days. It was quite incredible. When I think of what people get now, which is basically nothing, I'm astounded. Women are ejected from maternity hospitals any time between 12 hours and 3 days, 72 hours after they've had a baby. And for someone who's had a cesarean section, which is about 1 in 2 new mothers in Ireland, first-time mothers, that's very swiftly to be ejected when you've had major abdominal surgery, you've got a brand new baby to look after, you're probably not feeling great, you've only just come off morphine and oxynorm, which is an opiate, and now you're taking this package and you're going home. It seems awfully swift, but I didn't have that. I had this amazing supportive presence. And so one of the things that she told me I would be doing was I would be breastfeeding. So my child was a natural breastfeeder. Those of your listeners who have breastfed and who have natural breastfeeding children will recognize that. And those of your listeners who are listening who did not have children who are natural breastfeeders will probably be seeking out my address and sending me hate mail. But it is a factor. I mean, so often as women, we think, oh, it's me, I didn't do something. And it's not.
Yeah.
Half of it is the way that, your child takes to it. And, he was a very easy child to feed. My other children were less easy, actually. He was very easy. And, but he just seemed to feed all the time. And I thought, surely this can't be normal. Which it is normal, but I thought it couldn't be. And so I ended up calling La Leche League because I'd sort of been pointed to them as offering support. I contacted La Leche League. And in fact, my husband actually spoke to them. And I've never known who the person was because I then became involved in La Leche League. That's another thing I didn't mention. I never knew who the person was, but they said, or it was translated by my husband that they said, because they may not have said this. They said, well, if you want to bottle feed your baby, you can pick the times in between. But if you want to breastfeed your baby and get all the benefits, then this is normal. And that's the way he translated it to me. So I was like, okay. So that was my first kind of pointer, I think, in being. And then, I went on to become a La Leche League leader, and I'm also a board certified lactation consultant. But breastfeeding a baby and just having to be with your baby and meeting yourself
Yeah.
in still moments and meeting what had happened and how you were changing. I think really it was all that combination of, and of course, my La Leche League group had a library, and Naomi's book was in that library. So it's a very long-winded answer to you asking me, where did I first come across it? I guess I experienced it and I saw the word written in her book.
Yeah. And you're at that interface, I suppose, where I know they say matrescence can begin, pre-conception, but when a woman physically becomes a mother, you know, you witness that. Do you witness a shift in those moments in the woman, in the father? Like, just talk me through that experience.
Well, you see, I think that's a big continuum. And I think sometimes that's where people fall a cropper because they might have an image, often it is a sort of very Madonna-like kind of image of this pure kind of love and this pure acquiescence to this new way of being, holding a baby who is either breastfeeding beautifully or lying asleep. I mean, what baby does that when you want it to, or lying sleeping in a mother's arms? And yeah, so it isn't often like that for a lot of people. So I actually often say to people that continuum can be quite long and it's very broad. So some people will feel it. They've wanted it. They've really wanted that. They've wanted that change and that shift in themselves. Some people will even unknowingly or consciously have taken careers that will lead them to it.
Uh-huh.
So many times, I would have met nurses who would have said, well, it's all led me to this point,
Yeah.
or Montessori teachers that have wanted to come to that point. And some people may have planned that I want this career because I know that I can take a big gap and I won't lose my career. That I would be able to pick it up again, or it gives me skills for being with my babies, with my young children. And then other people, it's more tricky for them. They don't feel it.
Mm-hmm.
If they have highly medicalized births, that's a whole nother topic that we might come on to, or a whole issue we might address. The more medicalized labors and births are, the more tricky it can become. I'm not saying it will be, but the more tricky it can become. And then if there are difficulties afterwards, maybe there might be trauma from the birth experience. And so there's a lot of separation that happens. There's a separation from the experience. There's a separation from self. There's a separation from that rite of passage. There's a separation from acknowledging the matrescence within you. There's a separation from your baby. And trauma can do that. Difficult experiences can do that. And then, of course, we have people who do experience it, but who don't have a live baby.
Yeah.
So, when I talk about the postnatal, for example, in my upcoming course, when I talk about the postnatal, people always assume that the postnatal body, spirit, soul, and mind involves a live baby.
Mm.
But it doesn't. It involves certainly at the very lowest common denominator, it involves the body that is postnatal. And that means a body who's had an ectopic pregnancy, a body who's had a loss, early loss, mid loss, late loss, neonatal loss, um, stillbirth, um, uh, an abortion, any of those things. At the very minimum, the body is postnatal. But so are many other aspects as well, especially if that has been a very wanted baby. And then people may struggle with feelings they didn't expect to have if the baby was unwanted. So, it brings a lot of grief into a situation that one would not usually anticipate has grief. Although, again, interestingly enough, there is an element of grieving because you lose something to gain something else.
Yeah.
And, someone once described becoming a mother to me or the postnatal to me as it's as if you cross this bridge and it's very tactile and you're holding onto the rail and it's, a beautiful stone bridge and you take the step onto the other side of the shore and you just look behind to see if you dropped anything on the bridge and the bridge is gone.
Yeah.
And you can see the other side and you can see where you've come from and you can see how you were drawn to cross the bridge. But you just can't go back there.
There's no going.
You can never go back there. And I think that never go back there applies to the whole range of situations that I described. And then there are people who do have, live babies and yet who don't feel it.
Mm.
And I would always believe that, mothering, that consciousness of being a mother, of changing, it can come quite late to some people. Some people are natural responders to newborn babies, and they have a huge culture of being rather than doing already. And they come to it straight away. And then there are people who they have to have a little bit of doing first, so they need to do some things, and then it solidifies that change of being within them. And then some people have to do and to think and to be observed and to be recognized, and it takes longer. And so you have some people who are absolutely brilliant with young children, but are just like, oh no, I couldn't handle the baby thing. And then you have people who are absolutely brilliant with teenagers, and they flourish in their matrescence when they have teenagers. So, sometimes people say, I'm not a natural mother. And I think probably what they're referring to is that the stage of mothering that they're in doesn't feel easy and comfortable. It feels a challenge for them. So, do you notice that point, or have I noticed it in my work? Well, it's easy to notice hormonal changes and shifts when they're enabled. So the massive, massive, flourish and flux of oxytocin that a mother will, and everybody else in the room will experience to some degree, but certainly the mother will experience, thousands of times more than in any other shot of oxytocin they have ever had.
Yeah.
That is a bonding and an attaching and a love hormone. And it has an effect. If it's more diminished, and if there are other hormones at play or other emotions at play, maybe it's been a difficult labor, there's concerns for the baby. Um, Maybe even the mother, if the mother has a vaginal birth, there's so much anxiety surrounding that birth that the amount of oxytocin she produces is a little more suppressed by adrenaline. Maybe that person has a cesarean section, and maybe there's a lot of other drugs that are used, and there isn't such a great release, so they don't feel it straight away. So I think sometimes that can be confusing for people because they think, well, hold on a minute, I'm supposed to be like her, and I
Yeah.
don't feel that.
Yeah.
And I remember once a woman telling me that she took a lot of photographs of her baby because when she looked through the lens and she saw her baby, she started to feel more like that baby's mother.
Yeah.
And that's not strange. It's just a sort of outward validation of who you are,
Yeah.
and how you have changed. Long answer to a short question.
No, I think you've actually touched on something really important there, in that every woman will experience matrescence differently, no matter how a child comes to them and whether that child stays. And again, at the different stages then through our matrescence. But I think what you've touched on is really important, in that we are functioning within a construct of motherhood that says it should be this, it should be that, you should feel this is what's going to happen. And I
Mhm.
think when those things don't happen, we think, well, what's wrong with me? Am I a failure? What have I done wrong? How am I not feeling this? That must be a huge thing to navigate for any woman. Would you have experience in sort of witnessing that?
Oh, man. It's kind of like it's a scourge of motherhood, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the what is it? Compare and despair, isn't
Yeah.
it? And of course, it's everywhere now because it's on Instagram.
Mhm.
Everybody's following people, and nobody puts photographs up of their filthy house with the washing up not
Yeah.
done, and the laundry just on the floor, and the dog lying in the laundry, covering everything with dog hairs that's just been ironed and is black.
Uh-huh.
Nobody puts that on. Obviously, I'm describing it in detail because it is my house. Um, I have a white haired dog. Nobody posts anything like that. Everybody always posts these beautiful imagery. And of course, everything's on video now. It's not even photographs.
Yeah.
I remember a friend of mine, she's a postnatal doula as well. And she's from, I think she's called Ostara Ayurvedic. She does Ayurvedic postnatal doula
Okay.
work.
Okay.
And I always remember she used to say when she first had her kids, she said there should be this truth book thing for parents where we all just post what it's really like.
Yeah.
And, then people will not feel as if they're the odd one out because their house looks like that, because actually everybody's house looks like that.
Mhm.
And I always used to joke, we used to have La Leche League meetings around different people's houses. And my group, in case any of your listeners are looking to join a La Leche League group and they find themselves in Dublin, then my group is the east of Dublin. Um, and you can find us, La Leche League Dublin East. And we used to, at the time, not so much now, not since COVID, but there was a time when we used to go around different mothers' houses. So you would host the meeting in your own house. And, one of the things that La Leche League always says is, oh, yes, mind the baby, don't mind your house. And of course, none of us would do that, when the meeting was coming up. We'd
Yeah.
just go mad and we'd all clean our houses. And I remember saying, damn, aren't we supposed to be demonstrating, that our houses, it doesn't matter what the house looks like, it matters that, we love our babies and
Mhm.
that our babies are well and fed and that we're still alive and okay. But no one could ever bring themselves to invite people over to an untidy house. So I think that, I think that people do struggle with an image. The image is definitely, I would say, consistently false. We have a lot of promises made by people in the birth industry as to how your labor will go if you do certain things. I mean, no one can ever promise that. Just leave a pause there, ever. Because, birth is always unknown. We have no idea how one person is going to react to a life-changing rite of passage that is utterly transformational. And that I'm talking about if everything kind of like poodles along,
Yeah.
so you have no idea how you're going to react to that. And no amount of, working on a certain app or doing a certain set of exercises can guarantee that you will have a certain reaction to that. It's just not possible. What good preparation will help you do is it will help you focus on your coping skills. So that's certainly something that I would always do when I work with people is that, I'll say, I can't guarantee what kind of birth you're going to have, but I can guarantee that you will feel supported, that you will know what your coping skills are. You will be able to deal with things that are unexpected
Mhm.
and that you'll always be informed, that I'll always have the research there for you and that we'll talk everything through as it happens, and feeling that sense often helps people make the right decisions and draw on their own coping skills because we all have them. So I think it sort of starts quite early on that people think it's going to be a certain way. And of course, it often isn't that way. And then people start questioning themselves. Well, what did I do wrong? I didn't do the breathing exercises wrong. You see, I shouldn't have gone out that night. I should have gone to the prenatal yoga class when they covered the thing with the ball. And if I'd done the thing with the ball, then, I wouldn't have had a von Schuss delivery. That's
Oh,
ridiculous. No,
ridiculous.
it doesn't go like that.
No.
So then, of course, the baby is born, assuming we have a live baby and everything's well. And then breastfeeding is very difficult for a lot of people. And so the image is there that, everybody can breastfeed.
Mm.
There's a lot of feeling about that. Everybody can breastfeed. And most people can, but they will need support.
Yeah.
And that's a critical thing that's missing. We know, for example, that when we ask people antenatally in Ireland, well, would you like to breastfeed your baby? Uh, about 75% of people say they would, and that's what they would like to do. But we know when women exit hospital or their home or community birth care, which is usually day 2, day 3, only 39% are exclusively breastfeeding their baby. So we've now lost about 40% of the people who 2 months ago said that they were going to do it. So how did we lose them? Yeah, that's a key question that nobody in the health service is answering. In fact, the health service response is not to collect that data anymore. Last year, we stopped collecting the exclusive breastfeeding rate on discharge from hospital so that we didn't have to answer awkward questions anymore. One assumes. Which is awful because that means we've kind of given up on exclusive breastfeeding. And, motherhood and I mean, you can say breastfeeding, but it's actually about keeping your baby close. So you can not be breast milk feeding your baby, but you can still keep your baby close.
Mm.
It's that time of being with your baby can be tricky. And again, it's very difficult for some people, because your baby's crying all the time, your baby has colic, your baby won't be put down, you can't seem to get a rest, and you're thinking there's something wrong with me because the other babies don't do that. Well, here's a tip. The other babies do that. Just their parents don't tell you that they do that,
Yeah.
you know? So And everybody wants to have a good baby. What's a good baby? That means a baby that sleeps a ridiculous amount of time. Babies are not meant to sleep long periods of time. It's unsafe for them to sleep long periods of time. But no one kind of really reveals what's going on. So we all sort of live in this slight, how can I say it? It's a bit of a lie that we're all sort of sitting in there not saying how it is. That's one of my roles, say it how it is. So people actually realize that they're not failing. They've just got a normal, hard, head on, sort of commando style breastfeeding, or not breastfeeding, parenthood, early parenthood. That's just the norm. It's hard. It's not easy. It's not all Instagram reels. It can be quite hard. It's hard on a relationship too. It's hard if you're a single parent. It's hard on the relationship you might have with your own mother, and that's also a really big part, I think, of Matrescence, is the relationship that you have with your own mother. And as somebody who supports people through labor, birth, and the postpartum, one of the big questions that I ask people is, what is your relationship with your own mother? Because that often sets a lot of expectations. We do want to be like that, or we really don't want to be like that.
Mhm.
Um, and often, I don't know if other people have spoken about this on your podcast, but often trigger points for us in our bringing, where maybe they were triggers for our own mothers, um, that will probably be highlighted in some way for us in our parenting too. So
Yeah.
it's almost like we revisit these things, but we revisit them now as a parent. Maybe we have more compassion for our own mothers or not, but you often revisit those things too.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of self-blame, I think, that goes on, and there's a lot of self-questioning, um, because the imagery that we have is not really accurate.
Yeah.
And also, there's very little support out there for people, which is why I do the postnatal doula thing, because it is supportive. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. And I suppose the support is key, but also having the knowledge then is another piece of the puzzle. Because if we have this knowledge, rather than trying to survive in a system that's setting us up to fail from the beginning, if we had that knowledge, it might not make the transition for us easier, but at least we will know, okay, this is okay. This is just my journey. Might not look like that woman over there or that woman over there, but this is how mine is going. And that's okay.
Absolutely. And I think, knowledge and even perhaps taking that a stage further and knowing what is within the realm of normality, I think that can be really, really helpful for people because, women are, of course, played to by advertising and people trying to make money. The birth industry is quite big. There's a big baby fair each year, um, in which people are basically trying to sell pregnant people stuff, including stuff that they shouldn't be trying to sell them, um, because they'd be breaking the WH code of infant milk substitute marketing for doing that.
Hmm.
But there's always people trying to sell people something. Sometimes it's it's a genuinely good product that you really want to have, but it's hard to navigate and to negotiate. What is something that I'm being advertised to, because there's always a bait and switch that's involved. It's sort of like, do you find parenting A, B, C, D, or E? Aha, you do. Well, now we can sell you X, which is going to make that better. Usually X doesn't make it better. Um, but often people are led down a path where they think, yeah, that is me, and that is not normal. Because of course that's the missing link. It is normal for a baby not to sleep, a newborn baby not to sleep. That's quite normal, especially after 2 weeks.
Hmm.
That's what babies do. That's what they're supposed to do. They don't have a circadian rhythm yet. They're getting into one. It is quite normal for a newborn baby to want to feed all the time. We talk about responsive feeding, no matter how you're feeding your baby, because your baby needs to be held and your baby wants to be whatever your baby's your baby's wants is your baby's needs at that point. But then you'll have well-meaning other family members saying, "Oh no, that's put the baby in the darkened room and let the baby cry." I mean, what? so crying is deemed to be just leave the baby alone, leave the baby crying. You might feel as a mother that doesn't feel right to me, but you might do it once or twice, and then you'll come into your own. You realize, no, that's absolutely not what I want to do with my baby. So, you know, mothers don't get a sense of what is a range of normal, what emotions are in the range of normal, what behaviors are in the range of normal, what kind of psychological responses is in the range of normal, what their baby does is in the range of normal. And when you think about it, really, you get this packaged baby, and most people, not everybody, but most people are having their babies in hospital. And you take the package home, and the house is silent when you come into it, and you open the doors, and suddenly there's either two or there's three of you. And, you get into bed because you're still bleeding, and your baby starts crying, and there's nobody else there, and you have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And also what's worth remembering is that about 20% of people who have babies in Ireland, are not from Ireland.
Mm,
So they don't have parents, sisters, brothers, in-laws, cousins. They have nobody.
yeah.
So, and probably they're also missing the people that they might have relied on at home. And they're also perhaps feeling that traditional ways of welcoming matrescence are not present now.
Yeah.
So, there may be certain rituals that might be observed, and they don't feel enabled or supported in carrying out those rituals. So, because of well-meaning healthcare professionals, that we wouldn't do those things. So in some cultures, for example, you would never, ever drink anything cold. So you would never drink cold water. And yet many healthcare professionals will ask mothers to drink significant amounts of cold water.
Yeah.
We'd always be talking about giving our babies colostrum. And there's and I'm all for that, by the way, there's a huge scientific background to that. But in some cultures, it wouldn't be normal to do that. And yet those cultures have very high breastfeeding rates. So, we do what we feel is our culture because we live here.
Yeah.
But there's me saying I wasn't born here either. But, people who are some of our newer residents would find some of those things kind of difficult and contrary. So that just adds yet another layer. And then, of course, when you present those things to a healthcare professional, it's quite easy to feel belittled as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. Okay, a big question, but if you could change one thing about how society supports women becoming mothers, what would it be?
Oh, wow. One thing. Well, of course, we need more than one thing. I'm torn between more support after people have had a baby and actually getting more support before you have the baby and being more prepared.
Okay.
So, technically you are supposed to take your maternity leave 4 weeks before you have a baby.
Yeah.
And technically it is for that purpose. But in many respects, that's too little. So there should be, we have good maternity leave here. Now we have the 6 months plus the 3 months that you want to take. And we have the partners can take parental leave as well. But I think it would be great to have paid leave that was in addition to that.
Yeah.
That was maybe 3 months. Yeah, I'm going to go for 3 months, 12 weeks.
Yeah.
Where you are really enabled to prepare for your baby. And not just for the one day that you're going to birth that baby, but where you're going to prepare for your baby. And that there would be, more community hubs, that there would be more community groups for you to join, that there would be, more healthcare involvement, but crossed over more with the community pillar, not focusing on bloods and things like that, but just blood tests, but focusing on more on interacting you with your community meeting other people in your community. I remember when I had my baby, I was the academic and I knew nobody where I lived. Absolutely nobody. Um, because I never stayed where I lived. I used to leave home at 7 o'clock. I used to do my work. I'd have something to eat in town. I'd go to the gym or to the cinema and I'd come home late at night. And then I repeated the whole thing. And then on Saturday or Sunday, I'd go hiking or something like that. So I didn't know anybody where I lived. And then suddenly I had to be which was a great challenge to me to be in this physical geographical location that I didn't know people. And I used to just walk to the village and buy things I didn't need in shops so that I could speak to people, so that I have some sort of conversation with people. And that's why for me, I loved my allegedly group because I got to meet other mothers and I realized that there were loads of other mothers around. Um, and one of the things certainly that we would always say in allegedly is that you have a much higher chance of breastfeeding if you come to a breastfeeding group when you're pregnant, because you meet other mothers and you see other mothers who have sore nipples, or you see other mothers and how they manage to pick up a baby. You see other mothers out and about changing their babies. You see other mothers working with a sling. So you see all of that. You're not taught it, you see it. But I don't know, that's a very pipe dream. I'm not sure how you would enact that. Um, so I suppose a more realistic thing to say would be that I'd like to see more support. And we have these postnatal hubs. It still involves a mother getting up, still bleeding, getting her baby somehow to sit into a car seat if she has a car, or if not, putting it into a buggy. And remember, it can be winter as well, and walking her way down to a central point of location. So having a postnatal hub, who is that designed to primarily serve? It's not to serve the women who should be seen in their own homes. It's primarily to serve the service. So really, I think what we need is huge investment in community midwifery or similar, so that we can have a lot more support at home for people, so that people can have, remember I said I had those visits for 6 weeks, so that people can have those visits for 6 weeks after they have their baby and 6 weeks before they have their baby,
Yeah.
that someone comes to their home and says, okay, well, what are we thinking? Have you thought about those mother and baby groups that I spoke about? Did you go down? There's probably one in your local church, or there's one, at the local cafe, or there's one at the local jump zone place. Have you done that? Okay. Did you go to one of the meetings? Okay. There's a mother to be who lives 4 streets down from you. She's given me permission to give you her phone number. Maybe you'd like to meet each other for coffee. That kind of thing. I think that we need a lot more community support, and we lost all of our community midwifery when we had the local community midwife. Cast your mind to what's that show? Call the Midwife.
Yeah.
They were part of the community, and we kind of lost that. Instead, we all went to a central location, and the new postnatal hubs that are being initiated are all about central location as well.
Yeah.
Maybe not, it's not maternity hospital, but it's still a centralized location, and it's not taking it to the women. And I think that women need to be met where they actually are.
They are. Yeah. I just want to pick up on something else that you said there about your own experience of becoming a mother and the identity shift, I suppose, if you want to call it that you were the doer and the goer and the career woman and the academic. And then all of a sudden you were at home with a tiny baby in a house you were familiar with, but in an area where you knew nobody. Was that a difficult transition? Do you remember that transition?
Oh, yeah, it was really difficult. So, first of all, and I'm sure some of your listeners do that, is that I think in the States they call it your elevator pitch, don't they? Your who are you and what do you do?
Yeah.
So, in general, when people ask you, what do you do? I presume you might say, oh, well, I host a podcast, or I might say, oh, I teach doula trainings. When you're a new mother, it's really common for people to say 3 words. And those 3 words start with a J. And it is just a mother. How many people say that? I'm just a mother.
Yeah.
The just part. And I think society has conditioned us into saying
Yes.
just a mother. So maybe that's because, that's a whole sort of another podcast, isn't it? It's all about the history of motherhood in Ireland, but just a mother. And we don't sort of stand up proud and kind of say, I am providing entertainment, nutrition, education and whatever else to these 3 tiny babies. We kind of don't do that. So we often don't say that we're a mother because the identity of being a mother is associated with being just a mother.
Yeah.
It's a something else.
Mm-hmm.
It's a something else that's kind of an add-on to who you really are.
Yeah.
And I certainly reflected on that a lot. I reflected on the fact that society didn't want me to be a mother. Society wanted me to be an economic earner.
Mm-hmm.
Society wanted me to be more interesting and more useful and more productive. And yet, the most productive thing that you can do in many respects is create another human being that is happy and well nourished and attuned and regulated and cared for. And so there is that. There is an absolutely huge identity. It is a rite of passage where you transform yourself. Part of you dies for sure. I think in French, labor, there's a word for labor and birth, which is le petit mort. And it means that it's a small death. Part of you has to die. It's a phoenix moment.
Yeah.
You have to let all that go to be recreated. So any kind of recreation is painful.
Yeah.
It's physically painful. It hurts emotionally. It means letting go of things that you thought defined you. So you come to that point, well, what defines me? Who actually am I? And it's easy to have that kind of crutch in a way. Oh, I've got a decent job that everybody recognizes that that's a decent job. And when I say that, that's me. And people will tick that off that, that's easy. That's easy, Whereas, when you say something else, mother of 3 children, people almost assume, oh, so you couldn't do anything else.
So you haven't achieved anything. Yeah.
It's kind of like that's bottom of the pile. It's like, well, that's doing nothing. And I think that's brought us sort of full circle. That's what led Naomi to putting that title on the book, because it looks like you're doing nothing.
Yeah.
And actually you're doing so much.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a huge identity shift. And personally, it took me quite a long time to feel comfortable with it. I ended up leaving my permanent pensional, very well paid job that I absolutely loved in Trinity. And there was a very long period of time when I couldn't even walk in the campus because, it was a source of pain to me that I had to leave that. But I had to leave it because I just knew I couldn't continue doing it when I had my children. I just couldn't. I just had to be with them. So maybe that was my moment, really.
Yeah.
Was, the moment when I realized, I remember actually going up the stairs and my mom saying to me, what are you talking about? This is the society. What are you talking about? You were in university for, I can't remember how many years, 8 years. You have a PhD. It took you so long to get to the top of your career. What are you talking about that you're going to give that up?
Yeah.
And I actually remember kneeling on the stairs and talking to her through the, what do you call it? The banisters.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember kneeling on the stairs and with my little fist, like beating the stair in front of me and saying, oh, I can't. And she was so, taken aback at the passion and also kind of the despair that I felt.
Yeah.
That it was like, it was somatic. It was like fundamental. It was not something that I could think myself out of.
Mm-hmm.
And she just said to me, oh, well, then you better go and leave. So just don't be doing that on my stairs again. I mean, she was quite taken aback, but we never spoke about it again after that. And I got to revisit that moment many times. We didn't have a lot of money. Many times I thought, gosh, I could be on a monster salary.
Yeah.
I could have, those long summers where I'd just be doing research in topics I really loved and I'd be really well paid. And, I do think about it from time to time. And I think people do. And I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
But then I think being with my children, no. That's priceless. So that was priceless for me. It's not for everybody.
Yeah.
It's absolutely not for everybody. But I guess what I'm saying is that everybody will have that moment on the stairs where they'll know their true self and they'll know what they have to do next. And it might involve a huge shift of identity, or it may only involve a small shift of identity.
Yeah.
For me, it was kind of huge.
Yeah.
And, you know, I changed completely who I was. I was completely reinvented. Motherhood reinvented me as a mother, but it then reinvented me as a person. I now run this hugely successful doula training business. I have a lot of clients. I'm hugely involved in advocacy and changing birth in Ireland. And I would never have done that if I wasn't able to let go where I was before and I hadn't matresced myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So, having supported so many women, what is something that you wish every woman knew about matrescence?
Hmm. Yeah. To think about that for a moment. I think first of all that it will happen no matter what.
Mm.
That every journey is different, uh, and it will flower in a different way for different people and at different times. And I think perhaps the most important thing is to be open to the gifts that it offers you and not to try to resist it
Yeah.
and follow the path of just a mother, because it brings its own wisdom. And it changes us so fundamentally. And to be open to the change, to be accepting of it where we can be, and to sit with it when we can. Sometimes you want to rebel against it because it doesn't feel like you,
Yeah.
but actually it is you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is all for this week. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these conversations, please follow, like, and share the podcast so others can benefit too. And if you're curious about matrescence and how it impacted you, you'll find me on Instagram at BU Coaching. That's BEU Coaching. I'm a life coach for women and I support all women at every stage of life.